All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Tashima. I'm going to be our host and moderator today. Today we have a fantastic webinar on the 3 pillars of modern sales coaching and how they help you create quota hitting / quota crushing sales teams. Got some great panelists on board today. I'm going to go through a good discussion, looking forward to the ongoing dialogue of something that's super important and near and dear to my heart, which is helping salespeople do their job and hit their number. A couple things just before we get into this here. The first is Nudge. We are a solution that uses AI to drive revenue intelligence right in your own CRM. So we focus on tracking relationships, everything you need to know about the people you're trying to sell to during a sales cycle. And so we're going to look at all of the interactions you're having. We're going to identify who those people are, and then we're going to look at their level, their role, and then most importantly, how strong the relationship you are building with that person so you can better understand where your account gaps are and what you need to do next. Now, let's get right into the webinar. And by the way, if there's anyone who has any interest in following up more on Nudge, please write down into the chat panel that you'd like a follow-up or demo, and we will follow up with you. We've got some great panelists here today. First, let's start with Ron Massoud, who's the head of mid-market sales at Gong. Ron, thank you for joining. I'd love to get a little bit of background on yourself in terms of your focus on sales coaching.
You bet, Paul. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the session. So, as Paul mentioned, I am the head of mid-market sales here at Gong.io. I've been here for a little over 6 months, and could probably take up the entire webinar on my history in tech and being a Bay Area native, but we're not going to do that. That's not the session with what it's about today. But I have been in the SaaS world for a long time. Sales coaching is top of my list as I've built teams and try to get top performing teams generating revenue within an organization. So I'm really excited to be part of the session here today.
Thanks, Ron. Looking forward to it. And by the way, we are happy Gong users, so certainly excited to see some of the data and best practices you can bring forward here. Next is Bernie Borges. Bernie, great to connect again. I've known Bernie for a while. He's at one of our partners in a fantastic company called Vengreso. He's the co-founder and CMO, but has had a long time in leadership in tech. Bernie, please give the audience a little bit more detail on yourself.
Well, thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. Excited to be here and excited about the conversation. So as you mentioned, I'm a co-founder and CMO at Vengreso. Vengreso is a digital sales training firm, and we believe that the modern buyer needs a modern seller. So we deliver digital sales training and coaching. In fact, we won a Gold Stevie Award this year, so we're excited about that. And essentially, we equip B2B salespeople on how to create more sales conversations with buyers using an omni-channel sales approach. And for a lot of people, Paul, it's a paradigm shift. And that's where coaching comes into play. So, training and coaching often go hand in hand. And in my background, I spent the first roughly 12 years of my career in sales, and then I transitioned over into marketing. So I've had both the sales experience, both carrying a bag as an individual and also some sales leadership roles. And then when I moved into marketing and marketing leadership and eventually started my own company, I've always had that lens of driving value to sales. And when you're talking about selling in the modern age, it really is that paradigm shift that I mentioned a moment ago. So coaching is so important to get salespeople to really adopt the mindset that they need and really kind of break through the paradigm shift to get to the performance levels that sales leaders want to see.
That's fantastic, and I especially love, just from working with Vengreso and knowing you and things you care about, that it's not obviously just about being successful in your job, in your role as a sales professional, but being successful in your career, which is obviously the bigger picture. So let's get right into it. We're going to have a pretty good frothy conversation today. We just got through intros. We're going to talk a bit about why coaching is important. And what I'm going to say today is let's have our Q&A broken up. Let's do it through each different section. So for those of you listening, we're not going to wait to the end for Q&A. We're going to try and pepper those questions in throughout to get you more engaged, more interacted, right when those topics come up. And then after we get through it, why coaching is important, let's get into these 3 core pillars, the things that we think really matter to be successful. And then finally, we're going to review some tech, because there's a lot of tech out there, and there's some things that help you as a sales manager be better at coaching your team. So let's start off with this first one on why sales is coaching. And I'm going to bring up 2 stats and then open it up for discussion here. I think for me, when I think about it, there's a couple of big things that have happened. The first is that the average account executive experience required at hire today is down to 2.6 years. That's from data from the Bridge Group. So that means the average AE is really starting off with only a couple of years of selling under their belt. And then you pair that with the fact that people today, the amount of activity and the amount of noise out there is incredibly busy, incredibly hard to prioritize activities and things to do. But at the same time, for those people who do coach and spend the extra amount of time, this is a report done by Salesforce.com. If you coach less than 2 hours per month, your average quota attainment for your team is going to be about 90%. But if you just add 1 more hour per month and get that to over 3, you're going to see your quota attainment go to 110%. That is a massive difference in the success of your sales organization with that extra amount of time. So I think that kind of sets the table for why coaching is important from a data perspective. But what I wanted to go to Ron is talk a bit about what are some of your experiences, Ron, in running sales teams that you found it to be really critical in your success?
Yeah, so I would guess, given the audience here, Paul, that stat, as impressive as it is and as impactful as it is, probably isn't shocking. And I think what I have found is finding that extra hour is the hard part, right? Whether you're managing to a ratio of 8-to-1 or 5-to-1 or 11-to-1, it's always trying to squeeze that extra hour or two out of the coaching opportunities you have with your teams. And so, we often fall into this trap of training is, part of the process, enablement's part of the process, but that's not coaching. And so this stat really cuts to the core of what we focus on here and what I've focused on throughout my, sales leadership career is the coaching is where the value happens, right? We, of course, need to be trained on our products. We need to know what the pitch is, what the value prop is. That's all given. But that coaching, that extra hour is what makes the difference because it's where you get to drill in on the very things that we often don't have visibility into, right? So how do you coach and what do you coach on is as important as getting that extra hour out of your week to do the actual coaching, to make your team, perform better or focus on the things that they tell you are important to them as well.
That's a great point, Ron, that even if you only have 2 hours, still it depends how to use those 2 hours a month in the right way, right? And then we're going to get into some of that for sure. Bernie, if I pass it on to you, what have your experience been about prioritizing that time and what's worked and what are some of the results you've seen and why this is important?
Well, I'm going to start by telling you a little story from early in my career. One of my first sales roles very early in my career was with Eastman Kodak Company. Back in the day, we were selling business equipment, and I went through a 3-month training program, and there was a lot of coaching involved. And it made a very, very strong impression on me because they didn't just focus on product training or sales training, which was definitely part of the program, but they also coupled it with real world experience and then a lot of coaching. So early in my career, and you've got the stat here that the average account executive is only 2.6 years into their career. And similarly, I was early in my career and I learned very early on that coaching really made all the difference in the world. There's a stat that I think we're all familiar with from Xerox. It's been around a long time, and that is that 87% of sales training is lost within 30 days because most sales training historically has been done sort of the one and done way with no coaching follow-up and not spread out over time. So the story that I tell you about my early experience in my career taught me at a very young age, at a very early stage of my career, that as a sales rep, I needed to be coached so that when I moved into a sales leadership role, I understood that completely and had a very strong commitment to coaching my team so that they can get their maximum performance.
It's a great point. I love that story about it sounds like the DNA of coaching started with you when you were an individual rep and you carried that through into leadership, which is a great way to understand how truly the value is from both sides. One question that's come up right away, and we kind of took this for granted, but I think it's a great question to continue on in this section is, what really is sales coaching, and how is it different? Because there's a lot of different definitions of what it is, and there's also different timing elements of it. Maybe just back to Ron, how would you define sales coaching compared to, say, sales management, which a lot of people would say is different?
Yeah. And I think you've got actually a great slide on this, Paul, coming up about some of the pillars of it that get into the nuts and bolts. But for me personally, it's, the key is around specificity, right? Tailoring, if you will, to that individual. And the challenge in sales, of course, is the data that we use to coach on, right? We tend to use lagging indicators like performance or pipeline. So for me, coaching is about really understanding that individual, their behaviors, and how do I tailor a coaching conversation with them to help them get better versus, hey, let's have a team meeting, let's train on a specific topic. So to me, it's really about the specifics that are happening and surfacing what that individual is doing or not doing, and then building a coaching plan around that. But it starts with having the data and the insights.
Yeah, that's great. And Adam, thank you for that question, by the way. And I just wanted to add that I think there is a personal motivation element to it, which I think it's to what Ron was talking about, is that it's a tailored plan to that person. People have different motivations for being in sales, and where coaching is different than training is that you really want to align the coaching to where they want to go and what they care about, as much as, of course, the business goals themselves. And I think that is critical. And also, just to answer your other question, I think you're going to have to build some sort of formal process around it, but certainly coaching can occur both in real time and opportunistically as well. And so I don't think it's any one flavor of the timing element, but it's really the mix of things based on your team and where they are on the maturity curve. But let's keep moving on here. We got lots of good topics to talk about here, and I'm going to move right on to this next meaty section here on the 3 pillars of successful sales, modern sales coaching. And really, when Ron, myself, and Bernie got together, we thought we came sort of alignment on 3 key things we thought were important. So what we're going to do is go deep dive on each one of these and really try and tease apart what does that mean. And the first one here, I'll list the 3 right off the bat. It's mutual buy-in, or getting that commitment both between the coach and the sales rep. It's being specific as you approach those coaching sessions and those coaching moments. And then it's making it actionable so that there's actually a takeaway and something that can be returned to and reviewed as you come back for your next session. And so let's talk about, there's an interesting quote from a good friend of mine, Dan Ross, the head of Revenue Shopwide Plus, where he says, "No one cares how much you know until you know how much you care, until they know how much you care." In other words, if you go in and think, of course I'm going to start coaching because I'm a manager and they report to me, so they're going to listen to me, I think that's not the right way to approach it. You really need to understand their motivations and show them how you're going to help them be better and get more ahead to where they want to be. And so there's an interesting framework that I've used in the past, and this guy here, Alex Shootman, who was the head of sales at Eloqua when I was there, this idea of get it done, do it right, where really there was, you could hit your number and do all, and get all the deals that you need to be successful as a rep. But there's also an element of how are you getting those done? Were you upholding the company values through that process? Were you working with the people within the organization the right way? Were you focusing on the customer? And so we kind of look at this 2 by 2 and said there are groups in here that I think are coachable and groups that aren't. And an example could be you have someone who's just doing both well and they're hitting their number, maybe not the best person to focus on your priorities for those 3 hours. Versus someone who's maybe hitting their number but doing it in a way that's not always aligned with the company values, and there's an opportunity there. So what I want to do is throw it over to Bernie first on this one and talk a bit about the mutual buy-in aspect. And now since you've explained that both the rep view and the manager view, we'd love to get your thoughts on how you think about motivation and the buy-in as a critical element in coaching.
Well, Paul, I'm going to take you back to college. Remember when you were in college, there were 3 elements of any course that you took. And I think this is pretty universal across the globe, I think. And that is that there's content, right? Every college course had content. Every college course had live instruction, typically delivered by, a professor, kind of a person, right? Then they also had office hours. Those office hours are the equivalent of coaching. And you didn't go to office hours if A, the professor wasn't willing to give you coaching, if they didn't have office hours, because maybe some professors didn't even offer it. But those that did, they were bought into the coaching. They were willing to meet with you by scheduling time with their available office hours. Then your responsibility when you show up to meet with that professor is what? To come prepared to discuss the specific thing that you're struggling with. So the mutual buy-in is the sales leader saying, I want to work with you one-on-one. I want to help you overcome a very specific area of your sales performance that you're struggling with. Your responsibility is to come to me prepared with the specifics, give me the background, and then be willing to engage in a conversation. And I promise that I'm going to I'm going to listen, I'm going to offer you ideas and suggestions. And what I need from you is to be willing to have that conversation and to be willing to consider the ideas and even ideas from your peers that I may know about as a sales leader that you may not, because I've exposure to the entire sales team. So that's kind of how I approach the mutual buy-in thing.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I totally get that, and sure, we've all done that, and I certainly love that approach, because certainly in the world of universities, you know their professor is really trying to help you continue to grow as a person on top of passing the course. So good thoughts there. I'll remind everyone, we'll do Q&A throughout, so just write your answers either in your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll take them as they come. I want to flip it over to Ron. How about your thoughts on that key element of mutual buy-in and motivation? What's worked well? What hasn't worked well in your experience?
Yeah, I think going off of what Bernie said, I really wish I would have known about professor office hours. It might have helped my GPA in college. I don't know that I ever visited a professor after hours. The thing that resonates, I think, with sales professionals is this sort of metaphor of discovery. It's something we all aspire to do well. We're trying to get alignment with the buyer and uncover impact and all those things that we know good discovery does. I feel like that's a key part of the mutual buy-in we're talking about, right? Because we've all, I think, had quote unquote bad coaches or non-coaches where it was a one size fits all. You know, to Bernie's point, it's sitting in the lecture hall, just getting talked to, getting trained on a subject, but there was no opportunity unless you went to the office hours to ask questions, to understand that person's motivations. What are their personal and professional goals? So to me, discovery is a key part of that mutual buy-in. You treat it like you would a discovery call with a prospect, so you understand the challenges, you understand the impact, you understand what good looks like from that person's perspective. Otherwise, everything else feels like a one size fits all. So that's kind of how I approach these coaching sessions, as if it were a discovery call.
I love that, and you know, I'm sure you would empathize with this, Ron. Like, we've all made the mistake of just assuming sometimes that someone who's been in sales a long time wants to move in management, and you almost convince them that's the path they should take, when sometimes they're just very comfortable being the top performer and continue to be that expert and incredible performer. And so without really doing that discovery, you can make a lot of false assumptions on the motivations of some of your best sales professionals. I know I've made that mistake before, and certainly others have on the call as well.
Yeah, totally. That's a great example of we make that assumption, and some reps have told me, I have no desire. I want to make a ton of money. I don't care about managing. I don't want to manage. I don't want your job. All I see you do is walk around pulling your hair out. So why would I do that? So that's good insight to have when you're coaching.
One of the questions that just came in on this subject was, what about group versus individual? Maybe we'll stay on you, Ron, and then we'll switch back to Bernie. Like, have you done any thoughts of coaching as a group, or because of the personalization that you mentioned before, the personal approach, it just doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously, use Gong here at Gong. And so without going into a whole pitch, one of the things we do we started doing this bi-weekly, and this might be something that's more about the persona of those very reps that you talked about, maybe the younger generation. And my generation, reps had closed door offices, which seems ridiculous today. No one has them, not even the CEO. And it was like this, you talk about a black box, like what in the hell are reps doing, talking about pricing concessions, making promises, who knows what they're doing. And that world has changed now, right? So I think where that matters is from Gong's perspective, every other week we started this, and reps wanted this to switch to weekly, was a weekly coaching session where we go in and listen to calls. We'll pick a topic. The reps can tag their own calls. The one we did recently was, we're doing Sandler training, so it was around the pain funnel. So reps are tagging themselves on not necessarily their best calls. They're not afraid to get the coaching, do it in a group setting. And so everybody benefits from that perspective, because the feedback from the team was, we all want to get better at the pain funnel because we're going through it with Sandler. We see there's value. So each individual are tagging these calls, but we're listening to it as a group. And so that's how we leverage technology, in this case Gong, to use a topic that the team cares about and do it in a what I was surprised to be more frequent than I had planned, which was bi-weekly, and the team wanted it weekly.
And so it sounds like you do a combination of some group elements, but also obviously individual. And you bring up a really interesting point, Ron, where with Gong, especially knowing that we've adopted Gong and others may have adopted other similar solutions, is that there's this openness because you know you've accepted already you're being recorded. And so it's a less defensive environment for a group coaching system. People are naturally more inclined to share because of the culture you set by doing that. That is an interesting point I never thought about, and I think could lend to some good group coaching moments.
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's something I've been pleasantly surprised with how receptive. Again, back in my day, like I don't want you even listening to my calls, let alone recording it. But again, with the pace of change and people truly wanting to get better at their craft, it's just something we've seen has been a significant trend in sales and coaching in general.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, there's been a couple of questions here, Bernie. I'm going to switch the topic. It's the same area. Sorry, switch the question, but the same topic is, what do you think about in terms of coaching account executives? How are you going to differ that for those who want to actually become a better individual contributor versus those who want to actually get into management, knowing that you can't promote 5 managers in a sales organization? So how do you manage that? Have you had to deal with that in the past, with those motivations are maybe aligned, but you can't execute on all those plans?
Yeah. And by the way, I've been remiss in pointing out the fact that we, Vengreso, are also Gong users and also Nudge Relationship Insights users. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. To your question, Paul, I think this comes full circle back to the question about group coaching, because if you've got AEs, and some of those AEs have, in the course of discussions, performance reviews, career planning, have raised your hand saying, yeah, I want to go down the management path, then I think group coaching can be very effective as long as the people in that group have that like-minded aspiration, right? As contrasted by the people that Ron was describing, who are the salespeople saying, I don't want your job, I just want to sell. Then likewise, you can be doing group coaching sessions with them focused on the tactics and winning deals and overcoming objections and all the things that sales leaders need to coach their sales teams on to win more deals. So it's all about really getting the people together that have something in common into a relatively small group, generally defined as 10 or under. Even in the 5 range is good, but it depends on the size of your sales teams. And then having that common denominator among the people in the group, and then doing your group coaching sessions around that.
Fantastic. I like that idea of trying to get, not just aligning motivation between yourself and the team member, but between other team members. So, because you never know what else can also happen. There's definitely peer-to-peer coaching that's an element we're not even talking about today that can occur when you do bring those 2 groups together. I think that's a great concept there. Now, there are a couple of questions here, both from Veer and Jeff, that we're going to get to. Certainly getting a lot of great questions here. We could probably spend on this one section along, and we're going to answer some of them in the next pillar. So I'm going to just put a hold on those guys and get to you in a second. So the next pillar that we discussed was this idea of being specific, and specifically around what you're coaching on, and then how you're reinforcing good and maybe correcting bad behavior. And so what I wanted to do was get into some specific details around that, especially in the areas of who, when, and how often you coach. So this is going to answer some of the questions that are coming up here in the Q&A. I've done this myself and certainly learned this through other sales leaders that in terms of the who, and I will start here, that you don't necessarily need to focus on your top performers, and you don't necessarily need to focus on the people that you know are really struggling and maybe not going to make it, but it's that middle group, that middle 60-80% that has the best opportunity. Ron, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think, going back to something a coaching discovery session, for lack of a better term, might surface would be, let's say, reps who are on a path and part of their professional goals include management. Those are the people I like to leverage in the coaching discussion. You mentioned peer-to-peer, right? So that gives them some skin in the game. You're helping them mentor, you're helping them learn to become coaches, but at the same time, you're helping your underperformers through coaching from a peer or coaching from someone who's, in the trenches, has their hands dirty and is having success. So that's how we might leverage, to your point. Maybe there are fewer topics to coach on because they're doing well, although we can argue we can always find things, always find coachable moments, even in your top performers. But it's taking that coaching philosophy and developing more of a peer-to-peer plan for training the rest of the team, the people who are underperforming.
Yeah, that's a good point. Leverage other people in that peer-to-peer model to get to more people within your overall team than just the 60 to 80. How about you, Bernie? Have you developed a system in how you think about prioritizing who to coach and who maybe you don't get the time to focus on?
So to the point that Ron just made, and we're discussing here, the peer-to-peer coaching is huge. So as long as you can get the buy-in from the peer people, the sales lead, not sales leaders, but sales reps who have the ability to coach and have some success around a topic, then that's fantastic. Now, the way that we're dealing with it at Vengreso within the context of our training programs is we gamify it. So sometimes the coaching is part of sort of the gamification process where the folks, the salespeople on a team get to see how other people are achieving certain tactics within a specific set of goals. And there's a leaderboard, and then those people start to do the peer coaching themselves, oftentimes even without asking. So you might say, hey, Ron, how did you accomplish that? You're at the top of the leaderboard, and last week you were in 7th position. So tell us what you did to get to the top of the leaderboard on this specific area. And then now Ron is just basically given a platform, a stage to kind of boast a little bit about how he got to the top of the leaderboard. And what he's doing, even though we didn't use the words, hey, Ron, would you coach everybody else? We just asked him to explain, how did you achieve that top of the leaderboard status? Explain that or share that with your peers. And that peer level coaching, without necessarily even calling it that, can be really, really game changing.
Yeah, I really like that storytelling and getting people to tell. There's nothing that changes rep behavior like than seeing other reps be successful. I totally agree with that. Love it. And I think that there's an opportunity to do two good things there at the same time, saluting someone and congratulating someone who's working hard and doing the right things, and then getting other reps to exemplify and follow their behavior. Let's talk about when, and this is one that I think maybe has a little more discussion, and I can tell you my point of view. I really do believe the classic line that it's never a bad thing to lose a deal, but it's a bad thing to take a long time to lose a deal. And I think that this idea of coaching on the early stage, that discovery process, which is still so hard to do and so nuanced depending who you're talking to at the organization, is such a critical area to focus on if you think about where to focus on. But I'd love to hear from both you and Bernie, Ron, you and Bernie, as to do you have a particular area of the process that you tend to focus on? Maybe Ron, we start with you.
Yeah, I think it's all the above. Coaching is obviously something we've been talking about here, is a continuous, it needs to be a living, breathing sort of process that you're, adapting and adjusting as different members of the team you bring on, or different members of the team start to really nail specific skills that you're working with. But in terms of timing, again, going back to Gong and the platform, we can't be on all calls at the same time. We can't even listen in on calls as our full-time job, which it can be. So we need a platform. We need to leverage technology to help with the when, and to be, mindful of when things are happening that we can't be part of, right? People have a call, they go put in their notes in the CRM, and do we really know what happened in that 3,000 word conversation that's now distilled down into 20 words in the CRM? How the heck do I coach on that? Because it's so subjective. So the when part, to me, again, I have the advantage, as do both of you, of using a platform like Gong, where I get notification, I get alerts. The reps themselves get alerts when both things are happening that we are coaching on. For example, hey, Mike, in discovery calls, your trend is you're talking 62% of the time. That doesn't add up. We know best practices show, and we can compare that with top performers, that they're actually talking 44% of the time. So I want that to be something I get notified on. I want, a platform that tracks it, that measures it, but then alerts both me and the rep when those behaviors are not happening that we coached on, which is, hey, listen more, ask better questions, shut up more, right? Things like that. So with a platform like Gong, the when can be 24/7, right? I mean, it's listening on our behalf. It's finding those interesting moments that become coachable moments. So that's sort of how my perspective. But again, I have the advantage of using this great platform.
No, and I would agree with you on that. I'll just ask one question, and then we'll move on to Bernie to get his thoughts. But if you think of it, and this is something that I've heard, is that the most number of at-bats you're going to have as an account executive, the most number of times you're going to get a chance to interact with a potential buyer is that first call, and it all drops off from there. So in other words, if you're doing 20 discovery calls a month, that's the largest number of independent opportunities you have to engage a buyer. And so, you could think that that's one of the first areas to optimize versus later in the process where you are working 4 deals to close and executives are involved and you've mapped out the account. And so there's a lot less, things can go wrong there, don't get me wrong, but there's maybe less opportunity to make a massive impact on sort of the deal itself.
Yeah, and fair point. And I think when you look at conversion rates, to your point, and we analyze that here, of course, and most sales organizations do, is, okay, what's happening at stage one? What's our conversion rate, or what percentage of our deals move to the next step? And say that step is discovery. We might find a coaching moment there that, man, we're getting all these qualified leads. That's not a problem, getting them moved from SDR to the account executive. But once the account executive has it and is doing that initial discovery call, the conversion rate is dropping off. It's below industry average. So those are coaching moments. But I would also argue that we're also analyzing what happens at stage 4 and stage 5, which really gets into how are reps handling objections? How are they handling competitive intelligence, or when competitors in their deals? Those are coaching moments because we might see drop off or losing to no decision. That tells us a lot about what we should be coaching on if we're seeing conversion rates falling off the table in the latter stages of a deal cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense, Ron. And I certainly believe that the more you do, the better. I think that, and you're right, technology today lets you get to more priorities than you would before. Bernie, how about, and let's jump to the next question because I want to keep this moving and we've got still a bunch of content to cover. How about you think about the frequency of coaching, real-time, opportunistic, scheduled, monthly, bi-weekly? Is there a cadence that you found of work when you've ran sales organizations before?
Well, I think the cadence needs to be a combination of structured, so that can be weekly, that can be twice a month, structured. But I also think there needs to be the flexibility and the mutual buy-in between the sales leaders and the sales people, that it can be very real time. And, I do want to kind of touch on the previous question because it fits to this part of the discussion. And that is that sales leaders today really need to be like air traffic control people, constantly looking at the different metrics, right? So Ron's referring to the metrics that's available in Gong. We look at Vengreso because we're teaching salespeople how to be better digital selling professionals. We look at a 7-step cadence process. So we're measuring that. And so if we see that maybe 3 or 4 of the steps are being followed through on and not all 7, then we can measure the fall off on conversion to opportunity. So those are things that can have real-time coaching moments when a sales leader makes that observation, and makes that observation while the deal is still early enough and not lost, like you're still early enough in the opportunity where you can impact your potential to win it, and kind of catch those metrics early on. Like, hey, we know that prospects need to be touched 13 times. I think that number comes from inside sales, in order for us to really convert that into an opportunity. In your cadence program, you're only 3 touches in, and you're 30 days into this lead. That feels like it's not on pace, and it feels like it's at risk. Let's sit down and talk through it. And that's a coaching opportunity that should not wait until the next scheduled coaching session.
Yeah, I think we're all agreeing on this one, probably. There's some combination of structured and real time, and making sure that as a sales manager, sales leader, you're close to the front lines enough to know when to jump in and help out and be more proactive. I think that's absolutely correct. let's keep going here. We still have some more questions. I'm going to make sure I queue these up. But we've got one last pillar to cover, and for me, it's probably one of the most important ones, which is this idea of making it actionable. And doing that, we talk about the definition of coaching, and we covered a bit of this earlier, that coaching isn't managing, it's execution, not training, and it's about an action plan or a plan that can be done versus like having a forecast and discussing about potential future deals and what's going on in the pipe. And so I wanted to borrow something from a model that I've seen used at some of our customers called the GROW model. I'm not going to focus on every aspect. I'm going to focus specifically on the W in GROW. So this is a model that can be used for coaching, but the W for me is really important, and that is will. So it's this idea of committing to action, identifying possible outcomes, and then making specific steps to commit and to the timing and agree to support that rep in those steps. Ron, I know when we talked earlier, action was a huge part for you in the coaching philosophy. Maybe tell me about some things you've done to help hold reps, your team accountable when you do those coaching moments, but at the same time hold yourself accountable to make sure you support them.
Yeah, I like the making me accountable too. I sometimes forget about that, you know, I've got some skin in the game here as well. So that's a great call out. You know, for me, to draw another parallel from, you know, sales and the sales cycle, this to me, and we talk about this with the team, is akin to your mutual close plan, your mutual evaluation plan, right? This notion that it's mutual, we talked about that, but also that it's actionable with committed steps and expected outcomes. So when we have good conversations up front in the coaching process, right? Whether it's coaching on a specific topic or a trend or things we are seeing from the insights that we're getting out of Gong or any other application, right? We have to have a plan that addresses how we're going to fix it or how we're going to get better at it, and then what those potential outcomes look like. And it's nothing that we formally sign. It's not a DocuSign, but we keep it in a Google slide deck. It's typically 3 or 4 slides. It spells out the coaching moments or the things that we're working on. It spells out the behaviors that are, again, mutually agreed upon that have to happen to achieve success. And then we talk about what success looks like. Sometimes it's very salesy, meaning success is now you're generating or self-sourcing 3 new opportunities per month. Okay, but sometimes it's also a little more touchy-feely and intangible, like I want to get better at discovery, and the way I'm going to measure that is come away from all of my discovery calls with a clear impact analysis that has metrics in it. So things that they aspire to do, outcomes they aspire to have. The same thing goes with the coaching plan is, what are the deliverables and how are we going to sit down a month, a week from now and say, are we moving in the right direction? Are the things we coached on truly the moments you need or the things you need coaching on? And are the things we talked about or the behaviors you need to perform to achieve them, are they really producing results? And so and it's documented. It's right there in a slide.
I love that, the coaching close plan. It's mutually agreed upon close plan, getting to the final outcome. I love that. Something that I think I'm going to steal that myself. We don't do that here in terms of documenting it like that and thinking of it. And I love the fact that the reps will understand what that is. Hey, we do this. We already do this with our customers. So yeah, why not do it internally? That's a great idea. Bernie, how about you? When you think about action and driving that commitment, what have you seen work well in the past?
So where this takes me, Paul, is kind of the shift away from sales process. And I don't mean that we don't have a sales process or follow a sales process, but in terms of how we engage with the customer, the prospective customer, our sales team needs to be communicating in terms of understanding the customer's journey, as opposed to sales teams communicating to the customer, here's our process that I'm going to pull you through. Like, that's very negative, right? So the way that we want to coach around that is always discussing what's the next step that the buyer plans to take on their journey, and having a complete understanding of every implication of what that step is, and then putting in place the action plan internally within our sales team to A, see if we can help the buyer in their journey, B, help shape and influence their thinking, in a way that's both helpful to us and gives our salespeople a clear black and white next step and action plan that they can take as a next step in knowing what they need to do to help guide that buyer on their journey so that the buyer feels like they're actually partnering with the sales rep and that salesperson being helpful to them. But to Ron's point earlier, it's just got to be documented, and we're just focused on understanding the buyer's journey and then documenting everything we can understand around that as a next step.
Love it. Buyer's journey. Again, focused on that idea of getting something documented, I think was pretty clear in both. I'll just add one other thing just from having managed large teams before is that, if you think about holding yourself accountable, a way I like to put it, there's a mental element there, right, of, hey, I'm busy, I've got a bunch of things I know I need to get to today. Oh, wait, something comes out of nowhere, something happens I need to support my team on. And sometimes there's almost like I can't believe I have to do this, it's going to derail the things I've been focusing on. But I like to think of a manager that 40% of your job every day is just dealing with stuff that comes up. I mean, that really it's that kind of servant leadership model that I've learned the hard way and sort of adopted in a more easy way and say that is your job. I think that making sure you have that headspace during the day and the attitude to step in quickly when needed to help and focus on supporting them as you planned in your coaching sessions is super critical and is equally important as them hitting their plan and their committed actions as well. Well, those were the three pillars. We had a bunch of questions here. We're going to keep going because we've got about 7 minutes left here, and there's some really interesting stuff on tools that we're going to get into now. And there's been some questions here about like how do you tag certain conversations, how do you do call listening, and I think there's going to be some interesting chats here from some of the data that we see. So, the sales tech landscape is massive. We're going to focus on three things here today. I'm going to start with Bernie and a platform that I'm sure everybody uses today called LinkedIn. If you're not on it, go try it out. It's pretty good. Bernie, walk us through some thoughts on how LinkedIn helps in terms of coaching.
Sure. Do I have an hour? So you've got...
that's the Vengreso webinar that's coming up next week.
Yeah, right. So you've got the four items there on the slide there. So the first one refers to giving salespeople scripts that they can use in searching to find prospects. So I'll give you an example. If you sell into IT across different vertical industries, you can coach salespeople on how to create a script using something like Vice President Information Technology surrounded by quotes, so it's an exact match. The word "and," all caps, and then cybersecurity also surrounded by quotes, so that you're coaching a salesperson to search for VPs of IT in cybersecurity. And then you got to coach them on how to follow up with them, right? Then giving them prospecting scripts to do the follow-up. And we have something called the PVC method, PVC sales method, and that's personalizing your outreach, adding value each and every step of the way, because if you're not adding value, then the buyer doesn't even want to engage with you. And then also calls to actions. But not every call to action is, let's have a meeting, let's have a meeting, let's have a meeting. There can be other calls to actions. You can ask people to chime in on a topic. You can ask people to go, read a piece of content or even attend a webinar like this, right? So giving them scripts. And then also coaching people to post content on a regular basis. Posting content is very, very important. 73% of buyers consume between 3 and 7 pieces of content before they're even willing to speak to a salesperson. So why, as a salesperson, do you want to rely on marketing being the sole supplier of that content? Salespeople should be supplying that content as well, so that buyers can find it and engage with that. And then the fourth one is tracking SSI scores. So the Social Selling Index from LinkedIn, you've got a picture of your SSI score up on screen there. It's across 4 categories, and they are establishing a professional brand, finding the right people, engaging with insights, and building relationships. Each one is measured 25 points at a time. And the idea basically is that the higher the SSI score, the better the performance. And we've got some data. We actually published a report earlier this year called the State of Digital Selling Report. And we have data that shows that salespeople with higher SSI scores actually have higher performance. In fact, one of the data points is shared from Kirsten Boileau from SAP. This is public information published in our report. And at SAP, they found that sales reps that have an SSI score of higher than 70 are 3 times more likely to hit their quota. They have an average boost in sales performance by 55%. And on average, they have 3.6 times more closed deals. So sales leaders who are coaching their sales reps to constantly be improving their SSI score, sometimes even a point increment, can be a leading indicator that they're doing the right things on their way to creating more opportunities and more closed deals.
That's awesome. How's my score looking there, Bernie? Am I okay?
Yeah, you're over 74. I've got you beat, though. I've got you beat. I'm in the 80s, but you want to be 70 or higher. So you're doing good, Paul.
All right. As long as I'm not in the red. I think what my takeaway on that, which is great, is this idea, there's never been a better time as a sales professional to be able to build your own personal brand, and LinkedIn's a huge opportunity to do that. And so if the motivation for you aligns to not just obviously becoming one of those industry leaders and thinking through the problems your buyers are having and getting out there and talking about those problems, LinkedIn's a great place to do it. And it sounds like the SSI score is a good proxy for how well you're doing that. So you can have those tactical coaching discussions and where to focus. Love that aspect. That was great, Bernie. Now on to Ron and about a tool that I think helps in that early through late stage part of the sales process where you're actually talking to buyers and engaging them and trying and getting them to move forward. And that's Gong. Ron, I'll let you take it from here.
Yep, you bet. So, yeah, I mean, I've sort of alluded to this a couple times already, but the metaphor I will use to help just kind of keep this high level and quick is whether you're a sports fan or not, there's this notion of what people call game tape, right? Game tape means let's record what's happening either in practice or on game day, right? I actually volunteer to coach a travel fast pitch 18 and under girls organization that these young ladies are all trying to get recruited to play in college. So it's very competitive, very high level. They all want to get better and their parents all want them to get into college for free. So the metaphor resonates with me because I visualize, we record practices, we record games, and sales is very much arguably a team sport, right? Where there's the team element, but it's made up of, individual performances. And I think about how we are supposed to coach our teams. How could I coach this team better, sales team, softball team, if I don't have game tape, if I don't have insights? It would be akin to me not participating in a game, being at home, and the team plays in a tournament, and I get back together with them later that day or the next day and say, how'd you guys do it? And they tell me about it. Oh, coach, I killed it. I did this, I did that. I didn't do this well. I have no visibility with my own 2 eyes or ears to see how did the team perform? How did the individual perform? How did I as a coach perform, right? Because I'm supposed to be calling the right pitches or making the right decisions. So I feel like this metaphor is relevant in sales because I think it's unfair and unreasonable to ask sales leaders today to coach and instill some of the things we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes without giving those leaders the game tape, the visibility into actually what's happening in the field, on the calls, in the deals. And so that's something that it really resonates to me from both a athletics coach and also a sales coach.
That's great.
And you're showing some stats. I mean, we're all big fans, I hope, of data. And that's part of that game tape is we've learned a lot from the 10 million calls that we've recorded about what good looks like, right? There's ways to correlate behaviors with performance. So you've got some stats here where, the top reps go slower, and we can measure cadence in calls. We can measure question rate in calls. What's the pause rate before someone asks? And we correlate that with performance to show what are top performers doing on anything from talk time, question rate. There's a number of different metrics that you'll glean from these conversations and correlate that with your top performers. And that in and of itself becomes coachable moments. This is what the good reps are doing. This is what the underperformers are doing. And so that data becomes really critical in the coaching motion.
What I think is so interesting to me, and I know you've got a couple other slides here with interesting data as well. So slower was one, is this idea that as soon as you can measure something that was previously unmeasurable, there seems to be a greater tendency for behavior change. we all know we're not supposed to talk on a discovery call all the time. Like everyone knows that. But when you see you've talked 85% on that discovery call, it's like this sinking feeling in your gut, like, oh, that was a really bad call, and now I know how really bad it was, and I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to get it down to at least 60 or 50. So it's really interesting how that measurement drives that behavior change faster than I've ever seen before.
Yeah. It also tells us things like it's really easy. We'll do a pilot of Gong and start producing, showing, listening to calls. And after a week or so, we'll show it. And you could just see the light bulbs go on in people's heads. Like, yep, I could see, look at the people with the high talk times. Those are all my new reps. They're just blabbering through the pitch. They haven't figured out how to be succinct about it. So here's another great one that I love, and we use this often, is what are the top performers doing when they get an objection, right? The natural reaction, especially if you're selling features and not being consultative, is you're going to respond to that objection right away. You're not going to ask a follow-up question. Help me understand more about that. Well, what do you mean by that? Seems logical to your point, Paul, but when reps hear themselves not doing it and jumping in because they're really excited, I have an answer for that, then you start to see performance impact.
Yeah, I love this because in some ways, and this is what I found with my team, is that Gong helps them self-coach in some ways. I'm not saying it still doesn't need some management coaching, but I find my team look at their own stats and self-diagnosing their own calls a lot more than ever they would before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, if those of you who aren't using Gong, I definitely give it a shot. It's one of our favorite new tools we've brought into the team, and as we ramp the sales organization, it's become critical. I wanted to land on one last tool and one last thing that's really interesting, and that's, of course, Nudge. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, our real focus is tracking the strength of relationships during the deal process. Getting that data seamlessly into your CRM. At the end of the day, we all know that strong engagement through the deal process is critical. And then today, Gartner says that the average number of buyers you need to engage is between 7 and 11 in a B2B sales cycle to get a deal done. So that's a large number in the buying committee you need to get to. And I think the most interesting benchmark stat we have today, and we looked at millions and millions of relationships, thousands of deal cycles, is that the top sales performers, these are the salespeople who consistently beat their quota quarter in and quarter out, go 2 times as wide and 3 times as deep in every single deal. So if you think of the average performer maybe getting to 3 people and 1 champion and sticking with that champion, and hopefully they take them all the way to the house, that top performer is going to develop 3 champions, 1 being at the executive level, 2 in different roles, and then go to 6 people and make sure they're all bought in. So when the piece of paper comes across the desk or the budget fight occurs, they're getting everyone rowing in the same direction, which is for their solution. And so I think that this stat and tracking this, getting back to that same idea of measuring something that is typically not trackable today, but then it changes behavior. It makes people start to realize, hey, we should multi-thread. We need to think about getting to more people. Even though I feel really good about where the deal is today, I know I'm kind of single-threaded on the champion. And so that would be a takeaway I would give you. And so, with no time left, we had some key takeaways I think I wanted to leave everyone with here today. And certainly we will send the recorded webinar to everybody. There was one other question, we may get to it. First is that spending more than 2 hours per month is going to have a significant impact on coaching. And that doesn't have to be all dedicated, structured time. It could be, as Bernie and Ron mentioned, opportunistic during different moments. We had 3 pillars to really focus on: a mutual buy-in, being specific, and then making the coaching actionable. And then finally, there's some great new tech out there, great new platforms out there that really help you scale your frontline managers in terms of where they can focus their time and how they can help their team be successful. And so with that, I think I'll thank both Ron and Bernie for their time today and their expertise. And it's been a great conversation, and looking forward to some great coaching stories from everyone who attended today. Take care.
Good stuff.